So we have here some of the Redecentralize founders. Blaine, who's subbing in for Ross, who could be here for reasons. And we're just going to discuss some of the things that have come up today. Which is full of really great projects. Lots of them very, very abstract or theoretical. Lots of protocols, lots of standards. Lights on, buttons I can push. Product. So I wanted to start by asking the panel, do you think that there are any kind of projects in this redecentralized ecosystem that you've seen are ready for like mass adoption?
Which kind?
Am I good?
Go.
Yes, why not? Mass adoption. So I think just in the speed geeking was really interesting, and like Matrix.org have shipped the thing where they've got a Slack lookalike that talks to IRC and actual Slack and a bunch of things that you can just use. And I think that really solves the problem for some people who have to be in lots of different places, and it's really annoying, like being logged into 5 different things so you could talk to people. So I think that's a real product, real use. That would be my vote. Right.
I don't think there are yet, but I think there will be very soon. So in the sync backup session, we found that we were all using the same tools and we were basically dissatisfied. The happiest person there was just copying files by hand, because she at least it would work reliably. And there are around lots of projects that might solve that. There are things like IPFS, there are things like Cozy, there are things like OwnCloud. And none of them have reached the level of user experience where a normal person will like stop using Dropbox to use them instead. But the ones that have got, I think the one that will win will be one that manages to nail the business model and hire a really big product team. So Slack has, I think, like 100 or 200 people working on it, just doing, like, making all the apps and all the different platforms really good. So I think that will be the key feature. So look out for the ones that have a revenue flow because they're selling the privacy to corporations or because they've got a clever revenue model from a cryptocurrency, something like that.
Sounds like I should go check out Matrix. I wish I were more hopeful. I think there's a lot of really interesting work going on represented in this room. At the same time, I said earlier that I feel like we're further behind than ever. And the truth is that we used to have sort of email and even XMPP, and the web was sort of taken for granted as the platform that we sort of built online systems. And now we've seen the erosion by apps, so by the App Store model, so that even when we get decentralization in those ecosystems, they're still fundamentally owned by sort of Apple or Google, and it erodes the web. And then XMPP has fallen apart, and like how many messaging applications do you have on your phones right now? And the answer is probably more than 6, maybe more than 10.
Hands up if you got more than 6.
I think you would be surprised if you actually thought about it, because there's a lot. I'm impressed if you actually only got one. Do you have
Just
an SMS?
XMPP.
Just XMPP. Do you have an SMS app? An SMS, like text messaging?
Message.
No, my SMS comes to me by email.
So you've got email.
Basically, cut off your friends who don't use OpenStack,
Okay.
then not work.
Right. So
That is good work.
yeah. So it's sort of like how do we work together? How do we actually, the projects themselves are great, but how do we actually achieve consensus and actually build things that interoperate, rather than saying, oh, my protocol or my technology has this one specific property that makes it better than everything else, so you shouldn't use any of the other ones. I think that's a significant challenge for this community, and I hope this space can and spaces like this one can help people have the conversations to actually move towards building infrastructures that do interoperate and whatnot, without getting caught up in protocols, which is the other problem.
So, I mean, the question is kind of like, I know you've been facetious about let's cut off everyone who doesn't use their like there is a question there about mass adoption and what happens to the people. Like if we don't solve the usability problems of this stuff, what happens to the people who aren't technical enough to get with this stuff? Do we care about them? Do we need to solve them? If we're solving them, why? What's the reason that we're currently at the state of usability we're at? Is it we're too early? Is it that there's no revenue streams? Is it that there's a skills gap missing? What do we think about what does this community need to do to jump that chasm towards something that, like, so there's so many things in this room that even the people in this room are not using a lot of these tools because, like, and we care enough to be here on a Saturday. Like, what needs to happen, and is it important, and why is it important to bridge that gap? Francis, yeah,
Francis, you start. I think I don't mind. Like,
I'm going to say business models again and money. I really think it is revenue. I feel like, Google's just swamping me with good quality service. In the 1990s, if you take by comparison, the open source movement, which was lots of people were motivated to stop Microsoft having a monopoly in desktop computers. And to be honest, the Microsoft product had major technical problems with it. It crashed quite a lot. It had a clunky interface. It had problems. And you would immediately get a certain amount of power just by switching to Linux. You had a few hardware support was worse, but you got some power back. Whereas now, you basically are worse off if you switch away from the Google products. So, and part of that, you at the end of the day need to employ people to do the day-to-day grind of making the quality of the interfaces really good. I don't think that's a total cause for despair, because I think there are lots of intermediate steps. So you don't need a network of people for a decentralized backup system, because just one geek, a million geeks could run a command line program that did backup better, and we're not even doing that yet. So I think there are steps on the way, and I think that governments and corporations will be allies in this. The governments don't want other governments; they don't want just China and America to control the global politics of the information age. They want the other countries in the world will realize at some point that it's a national security risk to let all of the services be controlled by two countries. At some point, corporations will realize that the US government is continuing to look at their documents, as they did in the Airbus-Boeing case, that there are risks like that they can't afford to take in terms of privacy, so they will start putting money into these tools as well, which you see happening with things like BlackPhone. So I think there are actors with lots of money around, and some people are working out how to feed that into projects. So I think that's the thing to concentrate on.
Yeah, I think I would say the same thing. Usability, code quality, and marketing are the things that will get us to a point where we can actually see some successful projects. All of those are underpinned by money and the ability to build these things. If you have the privilege to do all three of those things successfully without funding, then you're probably getting the funding from somewhere else, or just have lots of spare time somehow. So those things. But I think just on the
I was just going to say, it also the grassroots movement is also really important, and you need the Google and Apple, who in the end beat the Microsoft to get rid of their monopoly. They were like the tools in the end that were used to get rid of that monopoly, but they were only in power because of the web. Without the web, neither of those companies, no one would have used the iPhone because there wouldn't be any apps on it, because they were just using websites with the initial iPhone. Google obviously is completely dependent on the web. So we need the open source ideological movements as well, but we also need big organizations which have lots of money.
And I think just to add and underscore the quality of the experience really matters. I recently switched back to Linux from OS X and got a developer edition laptop, and the trackpad it doesn't know to avoid my palm, so the mouse jumps randomly while I'm typing. It's the worst thing in the world. You have no idea how important it is until it stops working. And they shipped this as a Linux laptop for developers, and they were like, this is good enough to ship. This is insane. And there were sort of bug reports that went unanswered for 6 months that made this machine essentially unusable for any real work. And I think a lot of the time in sort of open source and community projects, we let those things slide because it works for me. It doesn't affect my machine particularly. So, actually responding to real users' demands rather than just your own demands is essential.
So these guys have talked a lot about funding, so I'm not going to reiterate that, but let's think about why is funding such an issue. And it's kind of quite interesting because the biggest sort of players, Google, Facebook, they really just completely decimated the business models in their fields because they're free and their business model depends on advertising and having the network, having all the users. You basically either have to charge and then you're not free anymore, or you have to have all the user data in the network, and how are you going to get that? It's really anti-competitive and anti-innovative. Vinay wants to say something. I haven't finished my thought yet.
I personally blame Richard Stallman.
You blame Richard Stallman.
Personally, I blame Richard Stallman.
You personally blame Richard Stallman.
The confusion that you created by having free software be called free has created this fundamental psychological problem of why am I paying for free software? Right?
Okay,
and,
so
yeah, dumb as that sounds, the fact is that the problem that this all hinges and rests on is that we've no effective mechanism of putting money into the pockets of open source developers. So, for example, if we built Flutter into Ubuntu, then we'd have a system where we could automatically get paid for writing free software. But right now, we have this problem that we just can't deal with the branding issues that money's still left us with.
So yeah, and what I was going to say is I think that needs to be kind of tackled on some fundamental level, and part of the way could be legislative, right? You could get governments to pass laws which say if you don't use open standards, there's a tax, right? Like either use open standards, great, but if you don't use open standards and you've got your own little walled garden, like there is this extra tax you have to pay, right? And maybe that money goes into a civic tech fund or whatever to help support open protocols and open source. Like you can attack it that way. The other way is also, the other way you go for it is technical, which is if you can do something completely new and innovative, which you can't do in existing systems because of the way they're structured and worked and financed, then that's another draw, which is like maybe the stuff that you can do on Ethereum is just completely fundamentally impossible for Google or Facebook or anyone else in existing infrastructures to copy and really sell that, really sell this thing is that you can't possibly do it without having this decentralized infrastructure. And I think the third thing is also social. You know how whatever Starbucks famously like rebranded coffee and made it cool and were able to charge 3 times more because it was like Italian espresso as opposed to just coffee and bean to cup, blah blah blah. There is this sort of idea that maybe as a kind of community we can kind of rebrand what being online and having an online identity, having online personal data, having things, our stories, our photos, our conversations, like what does that mean, and having it be cool to own it and control it, and for it to mean something else, and for actually paying for those services be a thing that's really kind of that people show off about or whatever. Like now hipster coffee, I recently honestly paid £3 for coffees, so for an actual 1 coffee cup, so it can be done, right? It happens every day, and I think those are the challenges, those are the 3 things that I would suggest we tackle. Question?
Yeah, so it's a brief statement and then it will be a question. It will become a question.
No, you can do a statement as well.
So my thinking around a lot of this is a problem of conception of the idea in consumers and people's minds what actually still belongs to them. And there's one very specific thing that I believe we should feel belongs to us, and it's more important than our data. It's our network. It's the people and the connections that we have, because all of these services are related to some other interchange of data between other endpoints and other end people. But for example, why can't I move my Facebook account onto Google Circles or whatever it's called, and still leave all the people who want to stay on Facebook, and still have all of those features and have some sort of an interchange? Because effectively that network is mine. That belongs to me. So Facebook is using that network to generate revenue, etc. So first of all, panel, do you sort of agree with that? Is that something that we should almost increase in terms of how we feel we own that and that that's a piece of our identity, and how do we go about changing people's mindsets for us?
I was going to say, like, I mean, that's honestly, that is the reason I care about open standards. Like, I wish I could use my own thing where I control it and still be able to talk to everyone on Facebook or Google or whatever, just like your Gmail account can email, Hotmail account can email, whatever. And I think that's the major battle. And I think it's a really nice way of actually framing and talking about it, which is, you know, you're like, this is your network, your set of friends, you're the one who invited people and they confirmed you and added you. Why should you lose that every time you want to, you know, lose so yeah.
I'm going to reference Vinay again, actually,
Okay.
who said earlier that we don't have, we have new cryptography, we have new like information technology, but we don't have a new philosophy of identity. We don't, as a society, have concepts like I own my own social graph, or what am I anyway in an information age where things don't have a physical location. So there's a lot of basic, low-level, like social plumbing that needs redoing, and I think it might take a long time.
And similar to
Do you want to use that one?
Yeah.
So, Richard,
Meanwhile, we're gonna wrap up very slowly, but one thing to be very clear, has anybody learned or discovered something today which they're really, really excited about? Can they tell us about it? But first,
What are you missing? If you had to choose one thing that like you think you're really excited but no one's currently doing, what's that?
That's fine. So to follow on the thought there is identity. I mean, I'm highly biased because I worked on a protocol for 4 years that went basically nowhere trying to do identity, because I think it's the one thing that's fundamentally missing, that you can't have a conversation with someone unless you can say their name. And how do you add people on your network? If we can't do that in a shared way, then we're screwed, is my opinion. And I think it's even more important in a decentralized context because we don't just have one network, we have many networks. And the way that we organize these things, and I think Google Circles got it inside out, you don't want to go to one place to interact with all of your networks. You want to go to different places to interact with your different networks. So it's the reason that so many people came from so many places to this room to have this conversation, because it's different than the conversation we have at home or at work or at the park. And the communities that we have are different in those different places. And this goes back to like Irving Goffman and the presentation of self in everyday life. We put on masks and we have different identities, and we need to be able to express those identities and those personalities in different ways, and we can't do that online right now. So I think that's the biggest missing thing.
My first thought was actually crazily a global state-backed currency, like a cryptocurrency, which is really fast, but like the World Trade Organization backs, that we just use for everything. But to get to that, crucially, there are lots of things we have to go by government. So I think government lobbying is the key thing, a key thing. And getting think tanks, NGOs, new NGOs maybe, to have like a more imaginative information age level of lobbying for all sorts of things, crazy things that you can get people around the room to suggest. That in 50 years' time won't sound so crazy. There'll be like the idea of a public library or universal literacy in 1400. 1400, 1500, when the printing press was new, would have sounded completely impossible. Like everyone's going to be a scribe, really? So we need similarly amazing, wild ideas as that, and lobby for them.
I struggle with one thing. I think like the three things they talked about was that sort of social coolness factor, wanting to be part of the crew, and the legislative support, and having unique factors is important. So I'd say something completely different and say what I really want right now is to be able to have really, really clear terms and conditions where I can opt out of some things. And I can just say, look, fine, I agree to this bit, and maybe you have to agree to some bit, but like, no, you can't do this, and no, you can't do that. And it's like really simple language and a few words, and the rest stuff is like, this is to protect you as opposed to the company. And I don't know, to feel like companies are actually trying to look after my interests would be good.
We should add that to TTIP.
TTIP.
The trade agreement. There are two big trade agreements that are happening.
Okay, so as a final wrap up, we're all going to have a drink. Is there anyone in the room who's really excited by something? They weren't excited by this one?
any other closing statements
Anybody's
by?
got more excited on this conference? Well.
Or anyone that have
As in what?
any statements or remarks? Sim has been putting his hand up as well.
Hello, hi.
We should give microphone to Sim.
What I'm really excited by is that some of the conversations I've had today, they've opened my mind in totally new directions. There's one in particular I had earlier, which just made me kind of really realise and crystallise the notion that today we have systems of government, systems of living and working, which are actually just outdated algorithms, and just the way that person has really expressed that just made me think, wow. So for me that was really exciting, and I'm probably going to linger on that for a few more days.
Sim,
Sim, you've got another mic.
you've got another mic.
So specifically one you can email in a box that's over there, a little black cube, that's really exciting. I want to
Put your hand up, email in a box.
It's cloud
Put the
free,
box
and then
up.
you've got a mail file on the box.
Yeah.
See, wave. Yeah, no.
I want to for everyone I know, like right now, so make that happen. But also the other thing was the robots.txt for open data for everything. Like that was super exciting and a really nice way of solving the open data problem in a distributed or discovery way, which is the most exciting thing I've had about open data to date. Apologies to everyone else.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you all so much for making today awesome and being here. And obviously thanks to the amazing Redecentralize conference organisers who include Blaine and Will and Erica and David Miller. Man, David Miller's been doing a lot of stuff. We've got drinks from 5 till 7, so like go get some drinks, have fun, and we'll see you back tomorrow at 9 AM. Woo!